more than a decade, Saturdays and Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Manouk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mindell. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba. For all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Along with Dave Manouk, along with Ezra Ginsburg, I'm your host, Drew Mindell, here for the next couple of hours to keep you entertained with discussions regarding the Winnipeg Jets, their coaching search, Rick Bowness's legacy, and, of course, all the off-season questions hanging around the local hockey club. Gentlemen, good to see you both on this Saturday morning. Ezzy, I got to say, I'm surprised to see you. I would have bet dollars to donuts that Naomi would have had you on the street corner as part of giveaway weekend looking to get rid of you once and for all. But I'm nice to see that you made it to Dave's house nonetheless.
That's a good one. I got to give you credit for that. That's funny.
Weekend?
I do know that it's giveaway weekend because we already put some stuff out because, we're up, relatively early on Saturdays, usually around 6:30 to 7.
This is where I tell you, by the way, my kids slept in until 8:30 and 8:55 respectively this morning.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's not.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, it's good for you, but it's not that late. If they were sleeping into 1 in the afternoon, then I would be like, were Sam and Aaron partying last night?
There was a gas leak.
Yeah, exactly. But we already put out. We had a Costco pool that we bought last year, and there was a little bit of a slow leak in it, so we decided to put it out there. It was gone within 10 minutes, and this has happened before in the past because this is an annual event. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's twice a year, is it not?
It is. I just looked it up. May 11th, because I had no idea. May 11th, 12th, and Ezzy, it's September 14th and 15th, so my birthday.
Yeah, so it's great. I mean, it's just a great opportunity to get rid of stuff in your house, and we have kids, as a lot of people know. And when you put like kid stuff out, whether it's car seats or stuff like that, that stuff goes so quickly. So yeah, it's a great weekend.
It is. We were able to clear out some stuff before. And the trick to doing it is to put it out on the corner before your kids notice that you're getting rid of things. Because as soon as you start to put something out that they haven't played with in 16 years or whatever, that's they immediately say, oh, no, I need to play with that. I was going to play with that today. So get that stuff out of the house before the kids notice and, declutter as the case may be.
But Dad, you just bought me that bike a month ago.
You failed me, son, without being able to learn how to ride it just yet. Nonetheless, happy giveaway weekend, happy unseasonably warm Saturday to everybody as well, as it's going to be something like 30 degrees or whatever it is outside. But we're here to talk about some on-ice activity, not so much with regards to the Winnipeg Jets, but future on-ice activities.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dave, are we going to talk about that Evan Bouchard OT winner last night? I can't believe, I don't know who ran the ICOT pool, sponsored by Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, obviously, but I was in bed for at least an hour by the time that game went to overtime.
I stayed awake. I was watching the end of the third period, and I stayed awake just long enough to start the overtime pool, and then I went to bed. Then I was like, nah, I'm not staying awake.
I saw our buddy John Waldman picked Evan Bouchard. I'm not sure if anybody else. So I think we might owe John Waldman some tickets to Rumors.
I have not looked at the winners just yet, so I'll check it out after. But yeah, I was not able to stay awake for overtime. It was, which is a shame because McDavid and Draisaitl yesterday were incredible, but that's a separate issue we don't need to talk about. I know they're just absolutely on fire last night. But nonetheless, let's talk about the Winnipeg Jets and, of course, the big news of the week, which seemed as though the tea leaves were pointing this way, is Rick Bowness officially announcing his retirement from the NHL. Thus no longer going to be the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets for the second time in a couple of years. The Jets are looking for a new bench boss in the offseason. We remember Bowness got hired after the Jets had gone all in with their push to get Barry Trotz. Barry Trotz said no. Rick Bowness came in, and let me ask you guys this before we get into the sort of the idea of the next head coach and the attributes of the next head coach and candidates for the next head coach. What do you think is Rick Bowness's legacy, both as a head coach, on the grander scheme throughout his time in the NHL, even as an assistant and as an associate coach, and then his legacy here in Winnipeg as a coach of the Jets for the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'm glad that you started with that, right? Because it seems like, Rick Bowness was a Jets 2.0 head coach for longer than 2 years, right, guys? Like, it doesn't seem like it went really quickly if you think about it. And I agree with you, Drew. I think it was inevitable. Like we talked about it, Dave M was there with Colby Spence, and Rick Bowness was getting very choked up. And at the very least, you weren't sure. I'm talking about obviously the end of season media availabilities when he was asked, like, are you going to be back this year? I'm not sure who asked it, Dave, doesn't matter, but
I think it was Freezer.
There you go. And you left that presser, Dave, not really, having a definitive answer. So I don't think any of us were surprised that Rick Bowness announced his retirement. I mean, we talked about it. He's almost 70 years old. He's been an NHL head coach or a assistant coach for decades now. In terms of his legacy, Drew, I think the obvious one is longevity, right? Like nobody in the history of the NHL has coached more games behind the bench when you combine being a head coach and assistant coach, right? So that's the obvious one. But for me, it's just his personality and how well liked he has been. Like you don't really find many people in the hockey world, and we know a lot of people in the hockey world, and you don't find a lot of people saying anything negative about him, Dave. So I think it's his legacy is going to be how good of a person he is. And obviously he's had a lot of success, and he's had, a lot of influence on a lot of players over, going back to, the 1980s after he was a player, right? That's when I forget the exact year, but it was the late 80s, Dave, when he first became an assistant coach with the Jets 1.0. And then he was briefly an interim coach, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. Mid to mid 80s for the assistant, and then
right.
I think 88, 89 when he became the head coach.
Right. So you're talking about a guy who's been behind an NHL bench since the mid 80s. Like that is incredible. So I think that's what stands out to me in terms of his legacy with the Jets is that he changed the culture and he turned this team into a defensive juggernaut, right? Mm-hmm. What was one of the first things he did? He stripped Blake Wheeler of the C. And that was something that I think at the time everybody agreed with. Blake Wheeler was no longer an effective captain.
Maybe not Blake Wheeler, but yes, everybody else.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, Drew. I mean, I think Blake Wheeler didn't like that, but I mean, clearly the Jets had to go in a different direction. Adam Lowry then becomes the captain, and I think we'd all agree he's a pretty good damn captain, right? So I think his legacy with the Jets 2.0 is that he turned this team around and he brought some respect to this team defensively, not just respect. On the ice, they won the William Jennings Trophy.
Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up because that's where I was going to sort of pivot to, Dave. I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole, and I know the times in the immediacy, the recency bias, and things like that.
That's a comment that always precedes something that's hyperbolic. But go on.
Well, yeah, fair enough, but I don't think it's a ton of hyperbole to say that turning this Winnipeg Jets group into a Jennings Trophy winning group is an incredible coaching achievement. I know that it's not going to be, you never sort of, you always evaluate coaches based on Stanley Cups and playoff success and everything else along those lines. But to turn this team, which was so porous defensively for so long, and to turn them into the team that gave up the fewest number of goals over an 82-game regular season, to me, is a simply incredible coaching achievement that I don't think should get lost, and I hope really does get its just acknowledgement, over the next few years when you look back at the sort of evolution of these Winnipeg Jets teams.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. I think that as he's right in terms of his legacy, and when you look at what he was able to do in Winnipeg, I think his comments from the presser was he didn't like the way people were talking about the Winnipeg Jets, and that was before he was a member of the Winnipeg Jets, and so he's got a lot of pride in the city, and obviously that was preceding his working for this organization. But
and sorry, Dave, just wanted to quickly say, like going back to what we said before, he played for the Jets. He coached the 1.0 Jets. His son, Ryan Bowness, worked for the True North organization. So Rick Bowness has always been part of Winnipeg, right?
For sure. And so to me, you have a guy who's connected to the city and takes pride in what's happening here and didn't like kind of the way people around the NHL were referencing it. So he comes here to be part of that shift in culture. And it's an easy thing to talk about. And yeah, Paul Friesen asked him some good questions in terms of like what that means. He asked players what that means. And I think it it just seemed like, again, if you were in the room, which we were quite a bit in the last, every year really, but like the difference between last year 22-23 and 23-24 was significant. And not least of which, most importantly, of course, is the results on the ice. And while the team had a historic season in terms of results, obviously nobody's happy with the way things went in terms of the playoff success or lack thereof. But when you talk about the fact that this team was able to achieve what only the 17-18 team had done, which was in terms of wins, in terms of the regulation wins, and like you guys talked about in terms of their, historic goals against, only team in the NHL to allow less than 200 goals. I mean, they were the ones who, again, 35 straight games with 3 goals or less. I don't remember how many straight games it was with 2 goals or less.
It was I think it was into the 20s there, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And so the point is that you have it. He basically turned around a culture, which you could be like, okay, that's important. It felt differently. But they had results, right? This team had significant results on the ice, and we didn't know, right? I mean, remember last summer, a year ago, after the season had ended against Vegas, there was a lot of consternation. There was a lot of uncertainty, and that lasted for the entirety of the summer, essentially until October, when they announced that, Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck had signed those 7-year extensions. So there was a lot of uncertainty within the city, within the fan base, within the organization until those things were done. And then he turns around again, and as he's right, Adam Lowry was the right choice for captain of this team. And I just think like the most important thing are, how many times do we hear this cliche phrase, it's a results-based driven business? Well, he got results. Now, again, he didn't get the results he wanted, and he talked about that on Monday when we listened to him speak as he at in the, I guess, the Scotiabank, whatever that's called, the fancy, not the Matt Frost Media Center where we usually are. It's a little bit of a bigger gathering at the
Scotiabank Lounge.
Yeah, that's it. Scotiabank Lounge. So we heard him talk on Monday. And if you didn't hear those words, we've got them up on our YouTube channel. And we also have the comments from Scott O'Neill and the comments from Adam Lowry in terms of the legacy and what, Rick Bowness has meant to them as people. So I just look at it and I think to myself, the most important thing in a sport is the results. Obviously, what the impact you have on the people is important, but again, people want to see winning. He got them to win. He got them to change their focus, their mentality. This group, we thought this group would always rely on Connor Hellebuck. They still do, obviously, but ultimately this team changed the composition of the way they played. And I think Rick Bowness deserves a lot of that credit.
I think this is a good comment that I assume Ezzy put it up on the screen there from Rob, saying that, also look at the strides that Josh Morrissey took, under Rick Bowness. Remember, It was 2 years ago in the offseason when Rick Bowness was hired that he goes to Morrissey, or he speaks with Morrissey and says, look, there's more in your game. You need to, you're just scratching the surface of the talent. And I don't think any of us necessarily thought that Josh Morrissey was going to develop into what he is now, and Rick Bowness is really, one of the individuals who unleashed Josh Morrissey. And
Morrissey went from a top 20 defenseman to a top 10, even top 5 defenseman. Maybe top 5 is a bit of a stretch
range somewhere,
but I would say top 10 at the very least, right, Drew? Sorry to cut you off, but you're right. Bowness took him from a really good defenseman to an excellent defenseman.
Mm-hmm. To the kind of defenseman that other teams have to game plan against. To a kind of defenseman that can change the game, who can impact the results single-handedly and lead a team to victory, which you weren't able to say that before. Now, you're not often able to say that about a lot of players. So that's again another feather in the Rick Bowness cap. So I mean, he gets. He's been praised all week, rightfully so, for both his on-ice and his off-ice contributions, for having his priorities in life firmly in hand, which sometimes you don't necessarily see. You see people, focus on the shiny object rather than staying grounded and committed to both your family and your team and everything along those lines. So I think Rick Bowness retires with his head held high. He retires held in tremendous esteem throughout the NHL. And here in Winnipeg, I think that his legacy is firmly written as a man who cared deeply about the Winnipeg Jets, both 1.0 and 2.0, and helped lead them out of a dark time that they were in into brighter times. And yes, certainly you don't like how it ended against Colorado, and you don't like how it ended against Vegas 2 years ago. But ultimately, Rick Bowness did far, far more good than he did than there was negative on the ledger when you tally up his time in Winnipeg.
And Drew, you just mentioned, like, obviously Rick Bowness would have loved to sail off into the sunset with the Stanley Cup ring.
Sure.
But I think, if this is your last year, and obviously it is his last year, so I don't know why I said that, but I mean, it's his last year.
Breaking news, Rick Bowness returning, according to Ezzy.
No, but like, yeah, exactly. But like, they had 110 points. What were they, only 4 points out from a President's Trophy?
They were
5 points from
fourth best in the NHL.
Right. And yeah, they had that stretch. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this was not a perfect season, but how many teams had a perfect season, guys? Right. So I think, this season, I think he did an admirable job in the first year, but to me, the second year is just as impressive for a lot of the reasons that you just outlined, Drew, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there was so much uncertainty. We knew that Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to be traded. We knew that there was a good chance Blake Wheeler was going to be bought out, which he was. But what we didn't know was that Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck were going to sign their extensions. And I think, you talk about Josh Morrissey. Rick Bowness did an excellent job with him. Obviously, you got to give credit to the other coaches on the coaching staff as well, but primarily Rick Bowness. And I think what he brought to this team was a positive culture and a team that believed that they could win, right? Like, they ran into a really hot Colorado Avalanche team in the first round. And by the way, the Dallas Stars could easily be down 2-0. I don't know if you saw them come back in game 2, but it's not like the Dallas Stars have a stranglehold on that series. Like, the Avalanche, there's a good chance that they get to the Western Conference Final and maybe beyond, right? So, but back to Rick Bowness, I think.
Well, to your point, though, Ezzy, sorry, about Hellebuyck and Scheifele re-signing. They don't re-sign if Rick Bowness doesn't come in, earlier that, at the beginning of that season or at the beginning of that off season, 2 years ago, if he doesn't come in and begin to make the changes and lay the groundwork for them being comfortable in re-signing here, Dave. He doesn't, if Bowness doesn't come in and begin to change the room, change the culture, change the attitude, there's no chance that Scheifele and Hellebuyck feel comfortable enough to in re-signing like they did in October.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, Drew. But I think ultimately, again, this he was able to do something with this team. Now, could he get him over that Colorado hump? As he's right. I mean, look what Colorado did against the Dallas Stars in the first 2 games. I mean, Dallas is a pretty good team as well. All 3 of those Central teams were pretty good. Now, the Jets clearly have some limiting factors, right? Their special teams all year weren't good. That's something that they're going to have to fix. And ultimately, at the end of the day, one of the things that Rick Bowness talked about is that he knew after game 5 he was done. He just knew. He just wasn't happy with the way he coached, the way he adjusted. And so I think he did an excellent job, an admirable job. Was he the coach to get this Jets team over the hump and to the next level? Maybe not. And clearly,
you have to ask yourself, could any coach get this team over the hump?
Right? I don't know. Like,
they're going to try and find that coach.
Yeah, and that's obviously, they're going to have to. We know that the presumptive guy who's got the lock on it is Scott Arniel,
the leader in the clubhouse.
Sure, but I mean, like, at the end of the day, one of the biggest things, and I heard Sean Reynolds was talking about this the other day, and he's not wrong. Like, the idea is you have to go and talk to as many coaches as you can possibly to get insight into your club, insight to what they think your club is capable of, what your club's weaknesses are, and then you kind of have to take all that information and see which coach you think is going to be able to best apply it. And look, Scott Arniel was 9-2-2 as a head coach when the Jets were, without Rick Bowness, when he was like, and Rick Bowness himself credited his coaching staff. He said, what other coach can leave his team for a month when he looked after his wife, Judy, or when he was looking after himself? And he said, and these guys all took over and they did a really good job. So you credit the coaching staff, because Rick Bowness was gone for quite a bit this year and they were able to keep this team moving forward. But again, like I said, one of those things that you're going to have to do is you're looking for a guy who's going to take this group, who's now learned to play defensive hockey. And as we, one of the biggest question marks is, who's going to be playing defense for this team next year, right? With Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon as UFAs.
Who's going to be playing second line left wing for this team? We got the comment up from Professor Andrew Haleko here. Nice to meet him, by the way. Game 5 pregame at City Place.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously we're not going to get into that right now, but look, I think if there was a stud defenseman in this top 6, that could go a long way. I mean, like, just look at some of the teams, guys, that are still playing in the playoffs. Like, Dallas has 4 stud defensemen. Colorado has 4 stud defensemen. But you're right, Dave. I mean, Rick Bowness, I think, did an amazing job with everything that was floating around the Jets. And they had adversity during the season in addition to Judy Bonus's health, right? Like, you had the Gabe Velarde injury, you had the Kyle Connor injury. I forget how many games he missed. It was a month and a half, 15 games, 16 games or whatever. And Kyle Connor was on pace for 50, 55 goals at that time, right, Dave? So I think, like, Rick Bowness and Scott Arniel, like, if you look at the Paul Maurice regime and all the uncertainty, and then, like Drew said, look, the entire province of Manitoba wanted Barry Trotz as the head coach. Well, I would say that Rick Bowness was a pretty good consolation prize as head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, because he led them to the playoffs 2 consecutive years. Obviously, the first year they had 99 points and they limped in, but this year they were a contender. They were a legitimate contender. That obviously, has a lot to do with Chevy going out and getting Sean Monahan, Tyler Toffoli, to a lesser degree, Colin Miller. And the reason why I say that is because the Jets barely played him in the playoffs. But Monahan and Toffoli, guys, made that second line legit. And I realized that, there was some misuse of Cole Perfetti, and I think a lot of people would have rather seen Cole Perfetti for 5 games on the second line, Dave, as opposed to Tyler Toffoli for 4 games. But then he went to the fourth line, but then he went back up to the second line. So, I mean, I think, all things considered, Rick Bowness did a really good job in his really short time with the Jets, 2 years. And, I'm not sure if you want to get into who the next head coach of the Jets is, guys.
Well, I want to get into it.
There's no shortage of candidates out there, but I do think it is going to be Scott Arniel.
Well, I want to get into the specific candidates, throughout the course of the show this morning. And Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press is going to join us at the bottom of the hour in a few minutes' time. But I want to just I want to highlight Brent's comment here. You're always better off leaving on your own terms a year too early than having to depart on someone else's terms a year too late. So, that's, I think, always a good lesson. That's a life lesson, not strictly related to hockey.
All right, I'm out. See you guys later.
But then the last line from Bell's there, because of course Bell's is an architect. So now he says we're going to finish building that house. So I like that.
So that's what I was going to jump off that and say, what are the coaching qualities that the Jets need to look for in the next head coach? So you have Rick Bowness, and we know his attributes as a coach. We also know the downsides that he has as a coach, and every coach has them. It's not it's not an insult or necessarily an overwhelming criticism to say that. So now what are the attributes of the next head coach? Is it somebody who's got a similar mindset and a similar tact to what Rick Bowness had, or the Jets may be looking for somebody who can take what Bowness did, but maybe pivot it in such a way that demands more playoff success? The regular season success has certainly been there for Rick Bowness. Do the Jets need to focus their hire on somebody who can get them a little bit more of that playoff success? Maybe has a little bit more of a skill set in that area, Dave?
Well, I was assuming that was a rhetorical question because I assumed we'd be going to break, and so you were just gonna. That was like almost like I expected, Drew, like the tease. Dun,
Okay.
dun,
Well,
dun,
there was
because-
also about 4 questions there, but is it not a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, a little bit from column C? Like, at the end of the day, Drew, I think that they do want to coach. I mean, the Jets, I think it's obvious just because the Jets are past the point where they're happy to make the playoffs, right? Like, this is a team that has Stanley Cup aspirations. Well, so do 31 other teams in the league, right? Obviously, a lot of other teams in the league are nowhere close to having a Stanley Cup run in them, right, Dave? But
yeah,
I think that, I'm going to say this. In an ideal world, I think the Jets announce Scott Arniel as the head coach, and they bring in some new voices as assistants. Because all due respect to Brad Lauer, like, we've talked to him, we've had him on the show before. I just think based on what he's done with the special teams, there's nothing there that gives me confidence that he's going to be the guy to turn it around. So I would like to see Scott Arniel become the next head coach, and then some new voices beside him. That's what I would like to see. Like, I realize Sheldon Keefe's name is out there. Craig Berube's name is out there. Todd McClellan, Todd Nelson, Jay Woodcroft. Like, Dave, we could probably put together a list of like 12 or 14 names, but
yeah,
I think Scott Arniel is the man for the job personally.
Well, okay, so let's end the Rick Bowness thing, because also acknowledging he did get, in his final year, the Jack Adams nominee. So, I mean, he's in for Coach of the Year. That's pretty significant. And that, you talk about, a nice way for him to end, Drew. And I mean, look, he's one of 3 coaches in a 32-team league who was nominated to be, the Coach of the Year. So I think that he'll go out the way he wanted to, and that's significant. And there's lots of good, David Carl, the University of Denver. He's a guy that a lot of folks are kind of talking about as a modern guy who's won, at the NCAA level. He's won last year with Team USA at the World Juniors. So he's a guy that a lot of people have kind of mentioned as a possibility, as a guy who can have an NHL aspirations. So we'll see where it ends up going, and we'll talk about it obviously after. Well, we'll probably talk about it a little bit with Jeff, and then maybe when we get back from break.
Much more to come Saturday morning. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you. This is the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Bottom of the hour. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you. We'll be here for the next 90 or so minutes talking about the Winnipeg Jets, talking about the coaching search, talking about some of the roster machinations that may be occurring this offseason. And we're pleased to bring Jeff Hamilton onto the program to continue such discussion. Jeffrey, good morning. Nice to see you. How are things?
Good morning, gentlemen. Ezzy, I've been awake for exactly 25 minutes. Don't you worry about that. Secondly, gentlemen, did I hear correctly that this is your first time understanding it's what free weekend is?
No, it's not our first time understanding what it is.
I thought it was a first timer for a couple of you.
No, Jeff. No. We wanted to put Drew out on the Dave M's curb here.
Okay,
and give him away for free for the first time. That's what it was. No, Drew,
you have to take him away at dawn on Sunday, because I think that's when you have to remove the thing.
Yeah.
So you got to make
in theory, I think people leave it out till a few more days.
Fun fact: the town of Selkirk actually goes around and takes everything after, so you don't actually have to remove it. That's their little gift of having to live there, I imagine. So that's that's a change on things. And as an avid garage sailor, guys, it threw me a little bit that you might not have known what free weekend was. Go ahead.
Are you an avid garage sailor?
Oh yeah, 15 years straight.
Really?
The season started last weekend.
And so
Oak Bluff.
Will you hit up like multiple garage sales in the course of a weekend?
All Saturday.
Really?
You want to get on the waters by around no later than 9. It's getting crazier, man, with these new shows like Canadian Pickers, American Pickers, all this other kind of thrift stuff. It's the community has grown significantly over the last, I'd say, 5 years at least. But yeah, you get out. I go with my mother and my sister. And we go out at 9 a.m. and we stop until we're tired.
So Jeff, what's the difference between a garage sale and a yard sale? Like, can you have
same thing?
Okay.
Well, typically a yard sale would technically a yard sale would take place on a yard, and a garage sale would take place literally inside the garage. Like, there's some people who just go, "Here's my garage," you want a little. I'd say there's a handful of rules you should follow if you're going to have a garage sale, but there's no one enforcing it across the city, so don't worry about it.
I like to we actually my wife's family has a cottage in Lac du Bonnet, so we go.
You've mentioned it 4,000 times on this show.
Some garage sales every so often. Yeah, well, a little bit of a humble brag, Drew, but I'm the king of the low ballers. I love to low ball.
Oh, bartering I'd say it's one of the funnest, but it's definitely one of the most common things. I mean, anybody who doesn't barter probably has
an amazing comment
or isn't comfortable. Absolutely. And just to be clear, everyone has a different reason for garage sailing. Mine, I try to find, unique finds. Like, I'm not necessarily looking to find something that I don't have around home. For instance, Oak Bluff had their community garage sale last weekend. And so that happens when, obviously a community gets together and I probably went to 30 there. And I didn't buy anything except for the first place I went to. And I met a guy whose dad worked at CN Rail for 55 years or something. And he had these beautiful wooden, almost like a cabinet filing system that they used to have back in like the 50s, 60s, and they were in really great condition. And he wanted 15 each. He had 6 of them, and I gave him $50. And so now I'm going to refinish those and turn them into a like a clothes dresser kind of thing. So
nice.
Yeah, and they're really nice. So I'll let you guys know. I'll send you the finished product.
Please, if you could do that. Now, just before we get to the Jets, so the fact you're joining us on this Saturday morning, does that mean we've put a crimp into your garage sailing plans?
Well, I was going to say that, but no, not quite. That's why I think when it always takes me a little while to answer as my answer is always yes for the most part, but I had to take a look at my schedule. My sister's in Ottawa, visiting my family, and my mom is helping my brother out, who's solo parenting this weekend with his wife and away for vacation.
Don't you mean your hometown of Ottawa, Hammer?
Well, I'm born and raised Winnipegger. I'm an honorary Ottawan. So
speaking of garage sales, the Great Glebe Garage Sale is, of course, a fixture.
Wow.
In Ottawa,
Drew, what is the Great Glebe Garage Sale?
So if you don't know it, then you haven't lived, Des.
That's right, Desi. You're missing out. The Glebe is a neighborhood in Ottawa, and then there's a, I don't exactly know when it is, but there's
Dave, this is too much.
Where
I'm not sure what the show has become.
Let's just put it this way: if all communities were like the Glebe, we'd be in a good spot right now. So it's a historic neighborhood. In Ottawa, and it's, if you go there, it looks like it might look like you're in Boston for a little while. Anyways,
and to be able to live there or afford to own a house there, you have to have a few $1 million. But aside from that,
the other thing.
That's the flip side.
That's why you were in that neighborhood, Drew.
Yeah, I rented in that neighborhood, as just to be clear. I didn't own in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know about the Glebe, but Drew's a bit of a dweeb. So let's get to the Jets here.
Glebe.
Thank you. Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press, our guest here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Jeff, obviously we spent the first 30 minutes talking about Rick Bowness, talking about his legacy as he announced his retirement earlier this week. From your perspective, what are you going to sort of remember the most or take away as the biggest takeaway from the Rick Bowness time as the Jets head coach?
Yeah, I listened to your guys' takes, and I share a lot of the same things. I think he covered it really nicely, just what he's been able to do not only in the league, but here in Winnipeg as well. You know what? I think he's a classic case, guys, of it's not, necessarily what you do, it's how you make people feel. And I think he's that kind of person who, while maybe the ultimate results, if you will, didn't necessarily pan out, and the necessary results, the top results, obviously being a Stanley Cup champion, didn't pan out with him. But at the same time, this is a guy who definitely, no doubt, made an impression in every single place he went to, and I got to see that firsthand a lot last season when I traveled with the team. And it was just, and I've said this a few times, particularly, and for sure on your show too, is that, you wouldn't go to a building, a road building, whether it was in St. Louis, whether it was in Philadelphia, whether it was in, pick any one of the 31 other teams outside of Winnipeg. And he would just do this. And I saw this at least 15 times where he would just walk in the lower bowl, like not even the lower bowl, sorry, like the
bowels
basement level, the bowels. Thank you, Drew. Yeah. 25 minutes, right? I'm still trying to catch up to myself. So in the bowels,
Drew knows a lot about bowels.
Every arena. Good one, Ezzy. And he would just it wouldn't matter if it was another team's head coach, another team's usher just happened to be down there, or a lot of teams have these people who stay with them for decades, people who sometimes they have mental or health issues, like disabilities, and they're just part of they're almost like a cheerleader for the team, right? And he would just have these one-on-one conversations in the bowels of these arenas with seemingly every single employee, where he couldn't go 5 or 10 feet without being stopped, and he would stay there and he would have whether it was a couple minutes, 5 minutes, longer conversation, he had time for everybody. And so I think his legacy ultimately is just being a good human being and being somebody who understood, I believe, way earlier than any coach, you could argue, because he obviously began coaching and went through a coaching era that was dominated by hard asses, by people who need to hammer on you. You'll have a lot of people who love that coaching style, who hated that coaching style back in the day. It certainly wouldn't fly today. And that's why I talk about maybe him being, well, certainly him being ahead of his time, is that I think he understood the importance of those relationships. And what it meant to him, because how else do you stick around this game for as long as he did? And I think it's interesting too to look at his opportunities with the Winnipeg Jets, his opportunity in Ottawa, taking a brand new team. I mean, he didn't really get like, and this is a guy who started with Boston, and took them to the Cup and then got replaced. And so you kind of think like he went from spot to spot with the head coaching job, and then almost kind of set up to fail in all the different places that he went to, and yet still had the love for the game to stick around as that assistant coach. And then fast forward, he gets more opportunities. He gets his chance in Dallas, he gets his chance in Winnipeg. And you look at it and you're like, wow, this is a guy is just a really impressive human being. And the one, in this long-winded answer, the other thing I think sticks out is his ability to be honest with players. Call a spade a spade. I mean, we saw that clearly here in Winnipeg after that first season, right? This guy, Paul Maurice, obviously, doing great things in Florida and had his moments here, would never have gotten onto that mic when it was warranted. I mean, you can agree or disagree with how he handled himself. He wasn't lying. He was a straight shooter. He called a spade, and he called out his players. And I think he knew in that moment, it wasn't just this. I know I'm not saying it was this, calculated thing. Obviously emotions are flying, but I think he knew that if he didn't get a chance to say what he said, that off season was not going to be as effective as he hoped it would be. I think there was, he probably noticed that a lot of these guys felt like they did pretty well in this series, and he wanted to let everyone know, particularly the best players on this roster, just how accountable they need to be. And so he brought that here for sure. And obviously the defensive structures and the Jennings Trophy, he didn't quite get there, obviously, but I think when you look at his 2 years here and you look at his, 38 years on a bench, whatever it is, 48 years.
A long.
It's an impressive run.
Hammer, do you think Eric Lofton is the front runner to replace Jamarcus Hardrick on the Bombers' offensive line?
They got a couple big guys on there, but yeah, we'll see. That's certainly one of the camp battles. I'm going to be at camp tomorrow morning.
Yeah, no, I'm just obviously joking around, but Bombers training camp is well underway, right? So it's the time of year. It's going up to 29 Celsius here in Winnipeg. So every time we have you on, I'm thinking Jets, but I'm also thinking Bombers. But I guess let's get to the next head coach of the Jets too, because obviously we could spend a lot of time talking about Rick Bowness. I think you spoke really well there. I mean, it was only 2 years as head coach of the Jets 2.0, but I think everyone agrees he did a great job turning this team around, especially the culture of this team and especially how this team plays defensively, right, Hammer? But I mean, to you, is it a kind of a foregone conclusion? I know you've been asked that question a lot, but is it Scott Arniel for you, or do you think the Jets are going to interview 4, 5, 6 coaches and then make that decision after that?
I think they would be, I don't know, derelict of duty. Is that too harsh? Or is that, if they didn't cast their wide net to just, to look at what, there's a lot of good things that occurred over the last 2 seasons, but, as you guys touched on earlier in the show, it's still 2 first-round exits. And that, that first round exit was not a good season by the end. It certainly had its moments. And so I think you need to evaluate what this team needs. I think that's going to be a process that includes players, what they need to take that next step. And if Scott Arniel is the kind of, coach, and I certainly think he's the front runner at this point for a couple different reasons. One, that I think continuity is important because, guys, I think that window, the Jets window, was this past season and maybe this season, and I mean, that's up to the Jets management and Kevin Cheveldayoff, clearly, because he's got a contract for life, to fix this team and to make sure that window extends, right? But right now, as this, roster is configured, this past team is going to be better than next year's team. I think you can make that argument. And so, who is the guy to take them to that next step? Again, I mentioned Scott Arniel is certainly a guy who I think is deserving of an opportunity. He's put in his work. I mean, obviously he had some down years in Columbus. Everybody seems to have a down years in Columbus. I don't know many coaches who who are up for any kind of awards or acknowledgement, even when they coach that team. But John Tortorella, I guess, to a certain point. But anyways, I think he's earned that opportunity. I think his fingerprints are on the Jets structure, and obviously that continuity is important to growing. But I also, but again, it goes back to, is this the right guy to lead this team? Is this the right personality to lead this team? And, I would be surprised, shocked if the Winnipeg Jets weren't looking outside. And there's been a lot of names. I heard you, mention a handful of names. There's been written names. I think Gerard Gallant is another guy that will be considered in that mix. I think Kirk Muller will be another guy that's considered in that mix. He was a guy who the Jets were fairly high on in the last hiring process. So, I think you need to come in. I just think you need to come in and wow the Jets. I mean, this is, I think, one of the
interview.
Exactly. And so, you can have, I guess you can make a situation where it's Scott Arniel's job to lose. But you need to, I think you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your team, you owe it to this franchise, you owe it to the city to see what other coaches think and do it in a genuine way. Don't do it just to, you're going to hire Scott Arniel and just take kind of trade secrets or whatever from all these people and go, because I think that can have an effect on you. I think you need to, if you do that process, you need to go in it seriously and try to find out who exactly is the best person for the job.
Jeff Hamilton, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Jeff from his work, of course, with the Winnipeg Free Press.
Well, Jeff, you talked about the next coach and what Rick Bowness was able to do. What about this foundation? What about Winnipeg as a desirability in terms of as a head coach? Because we always talk about, there's only 32 head coaching jobs in the NHL. It seems like, 70% of them are available right now. You could be head coach in Toronto, you could be head coach in Winnipeg, and there's a multitude of other places that are still looking for their next head coach, New Jersey. So from your perspective, if you're a head coach, a prospective head coach, how exciting is that prospect of Winnipeg and the underlying talent that is here? And that, for you to be able to say, hey, that's a place where I think I can take what Rick Bowness has set up in place, in that foundation, but really taking them to the next level. So how, from your perspective, how significant is that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. I think, let's put it this way. If you're Craig Berube, you're probably not thinking about the Winnipeg Jets. If you're that coach who has, all these options, is being rumored to be at the top of the list of all these various teams. And I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but you'd have to really, really, really love what's happening in Winnipeg, right? And you'd have to really, really see a makeup of a team that you feel, even though despite the last 2 years have been first round exits, that you think that you're the person for the job. But you'd have to, almost have to be kind of a passion project. And I'm not trying to crap on Winnipeg. I'm just saying there are other opportunities out there, more legacy teams, more money that would be offered in a contract, right? Like Toronto's probably paying more money in a contract than Winnipeg is. That's just kind of the facts and figures around. I think
Seattle makes a lot of sense for Berube too.
Right. Yeah. And then there's, places to live and family. And if you're American, all these categories. But I do think, to your point, Dave, is that, there is the workings here. Like, this is a good looking team. They have elite goaltending, maybe not so much in the playoffs, but we've seen, I think a lot of teams would want Connor Hellebuyck between the pipes. No doubt. You have some high-end talent. I would be interested as a head coach, and head coach, as you mentioned, there's only 32 jobs in this league. So the idea of being super picky, I don't think exists for a lot of people, but it's also a small community. And so I would be very curious, what exactly the configuration would look like as a head coach. What's the relationship like with Kevin Cheveldayoff? What's the relationship like with Mark Chipman? And, I think there's a reason why guys, Paul Maurice was here for as long as he was here. I think there's Rick Bowness. He retired. Who knows about the club option there? If he would have stayed for another year, I do think his health concerns and I do believe that the fear, if you will, that you have to go through a season like you did last year, you need to leave. That's not an ideal situation for your team. So you are putting your team ahead of that. But I'd be curious on what that dynamic is. That's a really important one, whether you're a head coach or a general manager, right? The general manager, what's your relationship with the owner? And we all know that Mark Chipman's very involved with this team. So, how does that work for a coach? As a coach, guy like John Tortorella is coming in here and being like, I know we got a GM, but I'm running this team. Is that personality? While we've heard a lot about, I think it's great that Kevin Cheveldayoff, shared breakfast and lunch with him at his home, but I don't think he's gonna, I don't think he would have been the right fit to come in here, and because he would have, and not only would he have wanted to call some shots that maybe that don't really work for the upper echelons of this franchise, but he would have probably be pretty public about it if he didn't get it. So so there's that concern. So I think, again, I think the Winnipeg Jets job is a good job. Any one of the 32 jobs is, and they do have a lot of skill and potential to go somewhere, and that's what you want out of a head coach. But it will be interesting to see, who they end up with, who they interview, and who they attract, because those names are going to come out. So we're going to see people who at least see the interest in the Winnipeg Jets. How a coach approaches it, I think, varies depending on who you are and really how wanted you are out there.
Jeff Hamilton, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Jeff, obviously the bench boss is a big decision, but also the on-ice performers are going to be a big subject in the offseason, because we know the Jets fell short against Colorado, and some of their glaring weaknesses became even more apparent and were exposed by the Avs themselves. So from your perspective, the name, of course, has been Nikolai Ehlers as the one most likely to depart if you're moving on from a forward to get a new defenseman. Is that the tactic or the approach that you would take, or do you think that there's other options for the Jets to try and shore up that back end that was so glaringly exposed by the Avs?
It's funny, because you asked me what would I do. I mean, I'm not really 100% sure. I mean, I like Nikolai Ehlers. I think there's certainly been times there's been, the eye test, whatever. I know the analytics certainly, favor him, but I think a lot of the eye test, shouldn't say a lot of the eye test, but there's certainly moments over the season and throughout the playoffs, not just this playoffs, but previous playoffs, where you need more from Nikolai Ehlers, right? You need him to exploit, his strengths. I think over this past couple of years, he was a bit of the whipping boy for Rick Bowness. I think, when he made, the problem was, unlike Kyle Connor, when he had several egregious turnovers, it usually resulted not out of those turnovers, but in that game, he would have a goal or two and it would kind of erase things. Whereas Nikolai Ehlers, when it rained, it poured a little bit, and, you would move him down the lineup. Now, I think because of his skill set, because of his talent, he probably gives you the best odds to try to, as a chip, to try to find, a key piece in the back end. Look, I don't think you're trading Nikolai Ehlers for a top D-man. I just don't think that, I don't think you think of
you don't think the return for him as a top D-man.
No.
You're talking Hammer like a 1-for-1.
Yeah. I'm not talking top four. I mean, top two. A guy who can play in your top pairing and legitimately, you're not, I don't think you're getting a Josh Morrissey for, a Nikolai Ehlers. And so, so when you ask me, would that be the best bet of shoring up the back end? Probably not. And, or isn't going to be necessarily a slam dunk, or is going to require more pieces to get that player. And then you got to ask yourself, who's that player? Who's that top, not a lot of teams are looking to get rid of a top end D-man, unless it's this is just me throwing a name out there, but a guy like Aaron Ekblad, who's dealt with a lot of injuries. If you have a guy who has injury issues, then maybe he becomes a little more appealing for a trade piece if you already can shore up your back end. But I don't, there's not a lot of teams that are just looking to get rid of a top end D-man. But there's other options too. I think, and I think Kyle Connor should be an option for a trade piece. I don't think he's getting better on his second contract, and he's tucking goals, and goals are at a premium. And so, I'm not advocating to trade Kyle Connor, but I'm saying I think there should be some, creativity if you're looking to find that key number one D-man to complement, Josh Morrissey, to really bring in some strength on your blue line. Because in the situation right now, I mean, we're talking lots about Dylan DeMello, obviously Brendan Dillon. Those guys are probably your 2-3 on defense, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think they're good enough to be your 2 and 3 on defense to win a Stanley Cup. And so you need to almost improve on them while also maintaining them. So it's a bit of a tough situation for the Jets. And the good news is they have an elite goaltender. So that helps. That is like an extra D-man to a certain point. But I do think it's a bit of a challenging situation. And, everyone, obviously a lot of the talk is centered around Nikolai Ehlers. I know Nikolai Ehlers might be somebody, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but when he considers his usage on this team, when he considers his next contract, he might be interested in a change of scenery or a different opportunity. And so that might just be the guy that, teams come calling for, and the Winnipeg Jets are open to having conversations. But I do think there needs to be a shakeup, man. And I'm not talking about, a complete teardown by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, obviously extending Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck prevents that. So, but I do think you need to change up a bit of the personality on this team. And that usually is done by, rocking the core a little bit. And whether that's a Nikolai Ehlers or another player, I do think that's kind of the way you need to go with this team. Because if you look at it, guys, I mean, everyone talks about the Dallas model, right? Like, the Dallas model only works because Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin have allowed the younger group of players to come up and be the identity of this team. Do you think Mark Scheifele starting a first of a 7-year deal, thinking that the next guys coming up are going to be the face of this franchise? And so I think that's the way that Winnipeg is structured. It's going to remain with the older guys when you have a handful of guys. And I think that might be the knock on this team. And I understand it because of where they were and their aspirations of winning a cup, but the youth movement needs to come up here. Chibrikov, Lambert, like those guys need to come into play here. So I'm saying, like, all those guys need to come in and get their opportunities, learn to fail, so that in 1 year, 2 years time, this team has those guys ready and able to play at this level. And whether that's Rutger McGrory, we'll see what happens with him in Michigan. But I think I think that's what you need to kind of plan for, is maintaining the current aspirations of being a cup contender, being a playoff team, but also understanding that part of that vision needs to involve the younger top end players that you have coming up, because that's what teams do. Teams establish a core, a culture, and then they bring in these younger guys, and these younger guys are able to grow under the strength of that culture. And I'm not 100% sure that that's intact right now.
Right. And you mentioned the stars, and obviously the two best examples, Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven. I mean, Thomas Harley's a little bit older.
Jason Robertson.
Exactly. Jason Robertson, if you want to go back.
Nico.
Absolutely. And just sticking with Nick Ehlers, because first off, I mean, you make a lot of good points. I mean, I think a shakeup to the core, the top 6 forward group, is absolutely, because a lot of the focus has been on the Jets defense and goaltending not being able to deal with the Avalanche. Well, what about the fact that, Nick Ehlers and Sean Monahan didn't have any goals in the first round of the playoffs, right? Like in 5 games, those are 2 guys in your top 6 that didn't have any goals, right? So I think you're right, Hammer. And even though I personally wish Nick Ehlers would remain a Winnipeg Jet, I think all indications are there's a good chance he is going to be traded. We should also say that, I mean, there's always a chance that the Jets trade him closer to the trade deadline, even though I think it's going to happen sooner than that. But what I wanted to ask you about Nick Ehlers is I've put some thought into this, because, I mean, clearly the Jets' strength, Drew's just thinks it's funny.
That's always a dangerous comment coming from you.
Drew thinks I only put thought into what I eat, but I do put thought into the Winnipeg Jets. And when Jeff is on the show, I always put extra thought into my questions for Hammer. But no, I mean, a team I'm looking at that look, and again, this is a hypothetical trade, but Hammer likes the hypothetical trades here. So I'll throw out a team that the Jets have done a lot of trades with in recent years, the Montreal Canadiens. You look at who the Montreal Canadiens have on the back end: David Reinbacher, top pick. Lane Hudson, Dave knows he was a star in NCAA. They've got a lot of good defensemen. And again, I'm looking at it like, could the Jets maybe do Nick Ehlers for a first-round pick and Caden Gooley? Maybe Caden Gooley they don't want to trade.
Whoa, Nick Ehlers for a first-round pick and Caden Gooley? I thought you were spending some time researching it.
Well, I'm not.
Sounds like you figured that one on the toilet before you got on the show.
No, but I mean, or maybe like
couldn't even get Nikolai Ehlers for Caden Gooley.
Yeah, Jordan Harris is another guy, right shot defenseman. Caden Gooley's a left shot defenseman. Jordan Harris in a first-round pick. I don't know. I'm just saying. I think a trade like that is more likely. Look, we had Andrew.
I think what your point is you need to identify this up-and-coming defenseman that maybe might be Gooley's too late. So, but at one point, I don't think he was ever under the radar. But you need to have your staff looking at D-men that are coming up that are not maybe valued as high as you have them high, or not playing that way, and exploit that, right?
Well, and the reason why I said Caden Gooley is because you have Reinbacher, who's a first-round pick. You have Lane Hudson, who's a second-round pick. And I'm just saying Montreal has a lot of good defensemen there. Jordan Harris, we talked about. I'm just saying, like, I could see Ehlers for a pick and a younger defenseman, as opposed to, like, I mentioned Andrew Haleko, who had Ehlers for Chikrin up. And a lot of people want to see the Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat trade. As you know, Hammer, those trades are very few and far between, right? So that's all I'm saying, that might be the type of pick they have, because I think you would agree, whatever trade that the Jets make, it has to be with making the Jets better in the short term at the top of the priority list. Because I agree with you, the window for this Jets team to win a Stanley Cup it's not 7 years. It's maybe not even 5 years. It's like 2 or 3 years.
Could be 1. Could be 2. And to your point, I think that's where the challenge is you kind of need to do a Casey Middlestat trade, because you need that guy now. And so you almost need to take that, you almost need to use that situation and apply it to yourself. Like, you need to find another team that's hurting down the middle, and the Jets are hurting down the middle because they're probably not signing Sean Monahan, and maybe they will. Speaking of Montreal, there's a good chance he probably goes back there. I know his postseason availability opened the door, I think, to Winnipeg, and I'm not trying to close it shut, but we'll see what happens there. But you kind of need to have a overstock in one important area to then reach a deal with another team who has an overstock in the other important area. And those two important areas need to match up with one another. And so, but I do think that probably needs to be the Jets' longer term vision, or if they, if they want to get, I think they're, whether it's a Ville Heinola, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the savior here, but, I think you need to focus on the present right now. And so you don't have the luxury of looking at a guy who you believe could be good in the future. Now, those trades are always good. Of course, if you can get a top end pick and a guy that you think will develop in a few years, I don't think anyone would complain with that. But what the Jets needs right now, it's, if you're looking at that window and you're looking at a 2, 3, 4, 5 year situation here, you need to get them here today. I don't know if that plan of finding a guy who you believe is maybe being underappreciated, or a guy who, even a young guy who's, overstocked on a blue line on a different team, I don't think that's going to be cheap if you do want him. So there are avenues. I was going to say there's options. I don't know how many options there are, but there are different avenues to explore, and that's up to the Jets management to find out which is best fitting for them and how they can get that guy in the door sooner than later.
If we've learned anything in the course of the last half an hour, it's that one man's trash is another man's treasure. And that's both true when it comes to on-ice performance and garage sales.
Yep.
Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. Enjoy the start of training camp, Bomber training camp. Tomorrow, we look forward to your dispatches in the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks so much, Jeff, for joining us. We'll let you get on with the rest of your Saturday. Have a great one, buddy.
Thanks, friends. Have a great one, and shout out to all the commenters. Have a great morning and weekend.
There you go.
Don't forget to wear your sunscreen, Hammer.
Never. Always do, man.
There he goes, Jeff Hamilton joining us.
Cut him
morning.
off there. Who's that?
I did, Sonic. I cut him off a little bit too quick. I apologize for that. That's Jeff Hamilton. We'll be back with more of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show right after this.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go...
We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
It's all over, folks, and the run has come to an end.
You'll be so far away.
A Canadian team hasn't won the Cup in over 30 years.
And the Cup will stay south of the border.
Maybe it's time we try something different. This playoff season, let's cheer with the fans we've always cheered against. Team up for the Cup at Boston Pizza.
Hey, Winnipeg, Wendell Clark here. I'm coming out there May 28th for the Rady JCC dinner. Myself, Dougie Gilmore, Grant Fuhr. Some good storytelling about Winnipeg beating us up when we used to come there. See you there.
We did it again!
You're on fire, man.
There's power in a handshake after a great game or great deal. It shows professionalism and respect. Two qualities Zappia Group Realty take pride in. You don't build a business where 95% of your clients are referred by others without honesty, integrity, and total dedication to client satisfaction. To sell your home for more in less time, shake hands with Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Get started at ZappiaGroup.com.
Always great to talk with Jeff Hamilton on a Saturday morning, like we just did here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Hour number 2 starts now. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you, continuing our conversation about the Winnipeg Jets and their coaching search. Of course, we're touching on the roster changes and things related to the roster for next season as well. Still to come on the program, Josh Wegman of The Score is going to join us at the bottom of the hour. So let me ask you guys this. We talked about it with Jeff in the interview. We talked about Rick Bowness. We talked about the coaching qualities for the next head coach and how to build upon what Rick Bowness put into place. Do you guys expect that it's going to be Scott Arniel as the Jets' next head coach? So as you don't have much doubt about that?
Well, I have a little bit of doubt, but look, I mean, if you want a good reason why Scott Arniel should be the head coach, just listen to last week's show when we had Kenny Wiebe on. We went long. We had an extended trip to the buffet. I think he was on for what, an hour?
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly. Kenny just kept talking. Actually, after we kicked him out of StreamYard, he just continued talking to himself. No, but I mean, I think Scott Arniel is deserving for a variety of reasons. But I'll say this much, Drew. I do hope that the Jets talk to a bunch of different candidates, because if at the very least we had a few comments. The chat is lively today, so we love it. But I forget who had the comment. It might have been Rob Mahoney. It might have been Kenny's water bottle. I'm not sure. I apologize if I'm attributing it wrong. But just at the very least to get some different perspectives, Dave, and gather some information, maybe in terms of like best practices and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. I think they should definitely cast a wide net. I agree with Hammer. I don't think that Scott Arniel should just be necessarily, handed the head coaching job on a silver platter. Obviously, it's not a silver platter. He's earned it, but you know what I mean. I do think that, candidates like Sheldon Keefe or Jay Woodcroft, Craig Berube, whoever, Gerard Gallant, I think is a deserving candidate. Dave mentioned David Carl. Like, what about a guy like Ricard Gronberg, who we interviewed, I think, Drew, 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, Ricard Gronberg, everything he's done with the Swedish national program, like, he's a guy, I'm not sure if he's on the radar with certain teams, but Kirk Muller was an interesting one that Hammer brought up. We should mention Kirk Muller was an assistant with Spencer Carberry in Washington. I have no idea, guys, if Kirk Muller's under contract. That might factor in.
No, it doesn't. For elevating a guy from
I'm just saying he would have to get permission, right? You can't just.
Yeah, but no team ever blocks an assistant coach from
no, I'm just saying. I'm just saying it's something to. I don't know if he's under. I just don't even know if he's if they're considering Kirk Muller. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, but I think to your point, and Dave, I want you in on this as well. Your point is that Arniel is certainly seems like right now on paper as the favorite, but it should not be an anointing. He should need to win the interview. He should need to lay out the case for why he is the best candidate to move this team beyond where Rick Bowness was able to take them, where they can win more than one game in the first round of the playoffs, because by and large, the roster is not going to look dramatically different, especially up front. I mean, it's just not. We know that it's not like the Jets. They're going to make some tweaks and they're going to do some things probably around the edges, but the guys who are under long-term contract are largely not going to. They're still going to be here next season. So it's got to be a candidate, Dave, that can take that same group, build upon what was done, and then elevate them beyond where they were.
Well, and as he's got the comment highlighted by Dieter Meister, Todd Nelson, who's currently the head coach of the Hershey Bears in the AHL. He's won the championship, I think, twice now in the AHL. I think he won with Grand Rapids. And of course, he won last year with Hershey. And he was a head coach in the NHL, obviously, for Edmonton that 1 year, I think. And so he's got some.
He was also an assistant with Dallas with Rick Bowness, I believe.
Yeah. That's right. Look, I think that the point is that you don't want this to be a foregone conclusion. And Scott O'Neill put in the work. I mean, I remember, if I recall correctly, before they hired Rick Bowness, how Scott O'Neill talked about, applying for this job and wanting to, really having a high level of desire. And he's committed to the city, right? Even he lives here. He's, obviously been in a member of the Jets 1.0. You don't just hand it to him and say, okay, well, you put in your time. And I know that folks are not happy with the whole idea of True North and loyalty. And again, if they just did it because he'd been here a long time and he'd been a head coach of the Manitoba Moose, he'd been a Jets 1.0 player, that wouldn't be the right reason. You don't hire him because he's not capable, but he's been a good foot soldier. If that's
you hire him because he's a good coach.
Well, and again, like I said, his head coaching record, as he touched on, it wasn't good when he was with Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
no, that was Drew that mentioned that. But again, guys, what was that? 15 years ago?
No, but my point is that people evolve, people change, and again, like I said, I think Scott O'Neill was impressive when he was given the original interviews to try and become the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. They hired him as the associate coach, and so again, like I said, to me, you have to, as an organization, this is a critical year. So I think it's not just as simple as just handing it to Scott O'Neill. You did a good job to date, and let's see what you can do. Can you get this group to the next level? We know he's got the trust of this group, but can he hit the right notes? And so, you as an organization, this is the most important decision you're going to have to make, more important than personnel, boys. I really do think that the head coach has to be someone who's going to be able to take this group, what they were able to do last year, and get them to that next level. Is Scott O'Neill the guy? I mean, again, none of us know. None of us have a crystal ball and say,
no, nobody knows what guy is what guy could you definitively could you maybe Gerard Gallant is the only guy that you could but you can't say
anything with any there aren't any definitive, if you knew that answer, you would hire that guy.
Right. So and so the thing is, Drew, I think it's obviously, for the purposes of our show and our website, and same thing with, Huss and Remus are talking about it on Winnipeg Sports Talk, Kenny and Rennie, obviously. But I mean, we could throw out, like I said, probably a dozen names, maybe even 15 to 20 names, right? Mm-hmm. Of guys that could be good coaches. But I think really it is Scott O'Neill's job to lose. And Kenny mentioned this on last week's show. I think he was brought in as a succession plan for Rick Bowness. I really believe that.
Do you guys have any concerns? So the last time Scott O'Neill was a head coach in the NHL was 11-12 with Columbus when he was fired halfway through the season.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Then he was the head coach the year after with the Chicago Wolves of the AHL. He has not been a head coach in hockey in going on 12, 13 years.
Well, but that's not true though, Drew, because Rick Bowness, when he was with Judy Bowness, took over as head coach. Okay. And he did it again when didn't it come out Rick Bowness had kidney stones, so we have that in common.
Yes.
So he has been a head coach. Well, he was an interim coach.
That's different. I mean, I do think that's different.
Well, no, but it's different. But it's not like he hasn't taken it. Come on, Drew, if you had a guy who hadn't done that, that would be one thing, but he has done that.
With respect to the job that O'Neill did when he was filling in for Rick Bowness over the this past season, and he did an admirable job. I don't put a lot of. I think the groundwork for that success was laid by Rick Bowness, and then Scott Arniel was just sort of maintaining the status quo at that point. He had, in
So
my
you're not
mind,
going to give him any. You're not going to give him any credit for.
I'm going to give him credit. No, I'm going to give him credit. I said he did a good job. I said that he did an admirable job. But I think it's different, and I wouldn't say that compensates. To me, my concern would be that he hasn't been a head coach at the NHL level for a dozen years, or at any level for a dozen years. And not everybody is suited to be the head man. Lots of great coaches cap out at assistant head coaches or associate head coaches, and that's the role best suited for them. You're best suited to be an offensive coordinator, not a head coach. If you want to use a football analogy. That is my concern with that's my concern. That would be something that I think he would.
It's a valid point, Drew, but it's also like we're trying to convince ourselves that Scott Arniel is not going to be the next head coach, and that's the obvious one. Like, that's obvious. We talked about that when Scott Arniel was a candidate to take over from Paul Maurice. So that's obvious. Like, to me, that's the low hanging fruit, that he hasn't been a head coach for 12 years. I do think, though, that when you say, Rick Bowness laid out the foundation and Scott Arniel kind of just kept it going. Well, Scott Arniel was the associate coach, so he also has something to do with that foundation, because he is Rick Bowness's right hand man. Yeah, so it's not like you can't say that Rick Bowness as the head coach, he laid out the foundation and he had no help from his coaching staff. No. So I would look. I think Scott Arniel. Look, Scott Arniel is not paying me, Drew. Like, I'm not just towing the company line here. I think that he's going to be the next head coach, and I think he's a good coach. And Kenny Wiebe, Ken Wiebe knows the Jets better than anybody. I think we know the Jets pretty well too. But he was saying that. If Scott Arniel isn't named head coach, I think other teams would consider hiring him as their head coach, or at the very least an assistant.
And that's perfectly reasonable. And that's perfectly fine. I just don't think that. I think it needs to be a fulsome search. I think it needs to be. You need to look at all of the candidates. I mean, the candidates have been bandied about. Murat wrote an article about it. Kenny and Mike wrote an article about it. I do think that you have to go into this coaching search with your eyes wide open. You can't just immediately. I don't think you can just hand it to Arniel and say, okay, you were there with what Rick built. Now build upon it, because I don't know that that's necessarily fair to Scott Arniel, and I don't know that he's necessarily up to the task, and we would never know until he gets the opportunity. But I do think that True North needs to, like with anything, you always need to hit a homer with the hire, Dave.
Yeah, we established that. Yeah.
And I think it's fair. I think that the chat has spoken up, and I think we were of the mind that he seems to be the most likely. If we were doing a betting show, which we're not, but if we were talking about the odds, it would seem, Drew, and you're more attuned to that than I am, but the odds favor right now would be Scott Arniel. That doesn't mean that there aren't other people, and that's the reason why you watch horse racing, because it's not always the favorite that wins, right? There's lots of candidates, there's lots of potential, and I just had the comment up from Doug, because I think it's the right one. I think it's the fact, and I've been saying this for the entirety of the segment we've been talking about this. You as an organization have to do your due diligence, and if you don't, you're really failing your team. I think, as even if Scott Arniel is a candidate, of course, you want him to be there. You want to give him that opportunity, just like you want to give half a dozen to a dozen other guys that opportunity to make that impression on you, because otherwise you're not doing your team the proper function, I think, as the general manager, as the owner, to really say, we have cast a wide net. We have looked at all the candidates. And if the conclusion you reach is that Scott Arniel is the best man for the job because of X, Y, and Z, then that's a conclusion you've reached because you've talked to, 10 other guys and he ended up being the best. And look, let's be realistic, folks. We'll hear about it. The names will filter out. Dreger will be reporting it. So we will have that information for you on our show or on the website. But this information will come out. If the Jets only talk to Arniel and maybe one or two other guys, we'll know about that. If the Jets talk to 10 other guys, you'll hear about that. That information always gets out there, whether it's Friedman, Dreger, whomever. My point is that we'll know about it. We'll let you guys know. But at the end of the day, that's kind of, to me, is what I'm watching for this summer, is to see just how wide that net is, to see what sort of way they're kind of doing this search. And then, how that kind of impacts the organization. And then again, ultimately though, Ezzy, we have to understand Scott Arniel, who wanted the focus to be on Rick Bowness on Monday. When we talked to him for a few minutes after the presser, Murat kind of pushed him on it. And he said, look, yeah, of course I want that opportunity. Of course I want to be the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets and take this team to that next level. So he wants the job. I bet you a bunch of other people want the job as well. And we'll see who ends up being the best choice for Winnipeg.
Yeah. Sorry, Ezzy, I just wanted to say I saw some comments in the chat that, Arniel will need to bring in his own assistant coaches, and there's no question that he would. The head coach usually gets to name a couple of the assistants that are behind the bench with him. The general manager usually gets to name one assistant and put him behind the bench as well. That's sort of commonplace throughout the NHL. So, if you're hiring Scott Arniel, or you're hiring any coach for that matter, you're not hiring them and tying one hand behind their back. You're telling him, you're giving him the vote of confidence, the thorough vote of confidence. So I don't anticipate it would be a two-year agreement like it was with Rick Bowness and the option. I think that had more to do with a function of Rick's age, a function of the team being in flux. That flux question is not as prominent as it was when Rick Bowness was hired. I would expect that whoever gets hired as the Jets head coach gets probably the standard 3 years, maybe 4 years to be able to, build and develop and mold what they want to do here in Winnipeg, Ezzy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I think I've said this, many times. I said this last week. I do think it's going to be Scott Arniel. I think a lot of people, the chat agrees that it's going to be Scott Arniel. And we've already established that we believe that it would be in True North's best interest to still interview several candidates. As we're speaking here, the Devils might hire Sheldon Keefe, by the way. I think Sheldon Keefe, makes a lot of sense in Pittsburgh to be reunited with his old buddy Kyle Dubas, but Mike Sullivan still is the head coach. Last time I checked, we'll see how long.
There's a lot of noise going on in Pittsburgh with regard to Mike Sullivan and
we'll
his
see.
Future there.
Todd Reardon was fired, his assistant, right?
Right,
So,
and it sounds like New Jersey might be interested. It sounds like things aren't necessarily copacetic in Pittsburgh when it comes to their coaching situation.
Yeah, that's true. I would agree with that. I think, what's more interesting to me is what personnel moves the Jets make. And it's not just Nick Ehlers and who he's traded for, guys. There needs to be some significant moves here on the back end. And the Jets, let's not forget that the Jets are going to most likely have to bring in another backup goalie. But the defense, to me, especially on the right side, we've talked about it. I think the left side is going to be okay with Josh Morrissey, Dylan Samberg, and Ville Heinola. I personally believe Brendan Dillon has played his last game with the Jets.
I agree with you.
We'll wait and see. But I think Dylan DeMello is going to be re-signed, and I think it's Ville time. I've been saying this to Dave all year long, and I know there's a lot of people in the chat, including Spency, even though his comment isn't about Ville. He does like to use the word copacetic, Spency. But, Dave, I think that right side, look, I don't know if you buy out Neil Pionk. That's a big buyout. But I think the right side of your defense has to be improved. I don't know the exact guy. Is that going to come via trade or free agency? I'd love to see Chris Tanev is a pending UFA.
A free agent.
So Chris Tanev on the right side with Josh Morrissey, and then your second pair is Dylan Samberg and Dylan DeMello, the two Dylans, Dave. Mm-hmm. That looks pretty good to me. And then, you have Ville Heinola and, let's say Nate Schmidt, or I've said, why not bring Colin Miller back as a third pairing guy, right? So that I'm more fascinated by that and what moves Chevy makes to tinker his roster, because I think, and I know we do the show every week, but to me, this is all noise, because I think Scott Arniel is going to eventually be named the head coach, and it might happen within the next week or two.
It's funny you talk about the defense, Ezzy, and Ken was on last week with us, and of course we spent a ton of time with Kenny talking about the defense, and he was making the argument simultaneously, I might add. He was simultaneously making the argument that the Jets need to upgrade the defense, but at the same time, they need to re-sign Brendan Dillon and Dylan DeMello. So, the two concepts were counterintuitive in that how do you upgrade if you keep re-signing?
And that means that Ville Heinola has to play on the right side. Because if you're keeping Morrissey, Dylan Samberg on the left side, those are all left shot defensemen,
right? Then
Heinola has to be a right side guy. And then you've already got DeMello, in theory, if he's re-signed, Pionk and Schmidt on the right side, right, Dave? So I don't know. I like Brendan Dillon. I think they missed him in games 4 and 5 against the Avalanche. I think he had a great season. I just don't. I think it's time for for a spot to open up for Ville on the left side.
Look, Brendan Dillon, I remember reading an article earlier in the middle of the season from one of our colleagues, I think who writes for The Athletic in Vancouver. And they were talking about Brendan Dillon going to the Canucks as a pending unrestricted free agent. That's where the noise has been, is that Dillon is interested in going back to Vancouver and playing for the Canucks. And we know how much the Canucks love signing Jets unrestricted free agent defensemen, whether it's Tyler Myers or Tucker Poolman or Brendan Dillon, if that ends up happening. But that's always been the talk, is that Dillon would, might be interested in going back to Vancouver. Now, Dillon brings an element of physicality that the Jets really don't necessarily have. You hope Dylan Samberg can develop into that. But to my point before about Kenny, Kenny's advocating for bringing these guys back, and you understand why, the advocacy and, where the Jets would be without them. But at the same time, you also know that they weren't good enough with them. So it's a bit of a circular reasoning, if you will, Dave.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Drew. And I think that it will be very interesting to see the makeup of the back end. That's the one, and look, we know that we talk about young guys pushing forward and earning their chance. And, one guy who is Dylan DeMello light, Simon Lundmark, 2019 second rounder, right shot defenseman, Elias Salamonson, another Swede. He's someone who I expect to be with the Moose next year. I know Jets fans already want to give him a spot on that right side. He did so well for Schlefka as they went to the championship, and he plays with a little bit of bite. He had I think a suspension in the playoffs, so he's a little bit of a physical guy. And we didn't know what was going to happen with him. He was one of the last training camp cuts. Went down to the Moose for a little bit before he went back to Sweden. So, you talk about that push from within. Ville Heinola, we know that he's no longer waiver eligible. So he's either going to be with the Jets or he'll be traded, or he'll be with another team if they try to slide him down to waivers. We know he'll get claimed, obviously, immediately. So that's a waste of years of development. So I don't think that's going to happen here in Winnipeg. But I agree with you, Drew. I think it's going to be a real fascinating thing to watch what happens with this back end of Winnipeg. And yeah, like, to me, ideally, right now you've got Josh Morrissey and question mark, and then you do have a Dylan Samberg, Dylan DeMello pairing as your second pairing. And even if you want to have Ville Heinola / Logan Stanley and then on the other side, Neil Pionk or Nate Schmidt, you know what I mean? It's interesting, but it still leaves you that big gaping hole.
No, but Dave, that's the whole point, is that's got to change.
No, I know that. I'm saying that you have, in theory,
Neil Pionk can't be that second pairing.
Neil Pionk as your top four right side defenseman. That's
I'm not saying Pionk is your right side.
Or even on your third pair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ideally you'd just buy him out, to be honest with you. I just don't think, I think we've seen what Neil Pionk has looked like.
A big buyout.
It is a big buyout, but
it's $2 million a year for the next 2 years. So
that's what I mean.
It's not, prohibitively expensive.
No, I mean, look, the Jets don't have a ton of cap space because of Scheifele and Hellebuck are eating up a lot of it. But yeah, I think that if you can find someone to take a contract, even if it means you have to deal something, then that's maybe what you have to do. Whether it's
I think that's more likely that they move him.
Yeah, and that's what I think. Like, I think if you give a sweetener and you offer up either Pionk or Schmidt, and you see if you can find a taker, and then again, like I said, to me, especially with Schmidt only having 1 year left, you try and find that buyer for Pionk.
That's kind of what I was getting at. I would rather have Nate Schmidt as a third pairing guy.
That's what I would think so too, especially because it's only 1 more year. So you hope
it's 1 more year for each of them, though. It's 1 more year.
Oh, I thought Pionk had 1 more. No. Okay, yeah. So they're both in the final year, right? So, but I still think that Schmidt in that third pairing, I don't know, just the way Pionk has fallen, it's been a precipitous fall for Neil Pionk, unfortunately for him.
Yeah, no question about it. So just for the record, you mentioned the buyout for Neil Pionk, if the Jets chose to go that way, cap hit would be 1.875 this coming year, and then $2 million the year after. So it's not,
it's not just the money though, Drew. It's that Pionk was part of that Trouba trade. So by buying him out, you're not recouping anything for him.
Yeah, but that trade was so long ago. You've gotten years out of him for better or worse. I mean,
why wouldn't you try to get something for him? That's what I'm saying.
I don't think you can. I mean, unless somebody needs to, unless somebody needs a big salary to get to the salary floor, nobody's giving you anything for Neil Pionk at this point. And
I don't know about that, but I think you could get. I don't think you would get nothing, but I think he has some trade value. But
define trade value. I mean, everyone's seen how he's played as of late, and I'm not trying to be rude here, but his play has not been has not warranted getting anything in return back
I think
for
moving him makes a lot more sense than buying him out.
Time will tell. Let's go to break. When we come back, Josh Wegman of The Score is going to join us for more talk around the NHL. Saturday morning, bottom of hour number 2, the Illegal Curve Hockey Show rolls on. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show rolls on this Saturday morning. Drew Mandel, Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg with you. We're pleased to welcome to the program from The Score, Josh Wegman joins us on the show. Josh, good morning. Happy Saturday to you. How are things?
Things are great. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it.
It's our
I like that
pleasure,
green chair, Josh.
Thank you. I think it's technically a gaming chair, but I found it more comfortable when I was looking for a desk chair.
You have a good sit on right now.
Yeah, leaning back a bit, nice and relaxed.
Josh obviously brought you on. We'll look around the NHL as the second round of the playoffs continues. The Leafs obviously going out in Game 7 was a big story, and then the dismissal of Sheldon Keefe as head coach. A bit of a different twist on the question, though, for you. Who's more disappointing right now, the Leafs or the Blue Jays?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think the Leafs losing in Game 7 to Boston was pretty predictable in that sense. And I know there was some pessimism around the Jays going into this season, but I don't know if anybody expected it to be this bad. So it's tight, but I think the Leafs take the cake. I mean, 8 years in the Matthews era, 7 first-round exits, doesn't get too much worse than that.
Drew, can we throw in Chad Kelly and the Argos pinball as well?
In a much different context, but yes, I think they would take the cake when it comes to disappointing, but for a much more serious reason than the Leafs and the Jays struggles.
And people don't even care about the Argos in Toronto, right, Josh?
I wouldn't say they don't care about it. There's definitely a smaller fan base for it. They get lost in the mix a bit with TFC and the Jays going on in the summer, but they have their certain diehard fans. I still think
they have their hundreds of fans.
Yeah,
that's very snarky by Mr.
Nothing like out west, though. Obviously, in the CFL.
Yeah, I'm just giving the Argos fans a hard time.
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
Josh, so obviously, as I mentioned, the Leafs, they go out, they fire Sheldon Keefe. It sounds like there's going to be changes to the core four. How do those changes better the Toronto Maple Leafs and put them in a better position to get out of the first round and get closer to what they think is their ultimate destination?
Well, I think the idea is that having 4 forwards make $40+ million just hasn't worked, right? Especially now that Tavares has been in decline the last couple of years here. So I think if you move a guy like Marner, let's say, for example, he's obviously the logical candidate to be moved just because you're not going to trade Matthews and Nylander's locked up long-term, and Tavares, again, wouldn't have any value. But if you move someone like Marner, maybe you're just shaking up that core a bit, shaking up the room, and maybe you can spend more of that money on the blue line, which has some pretty glaring holes. Their center depth is a bit of an issue. So maybe you can, even if you're losing a star player, you can use that money to just allocate into other areas and make your team more balanced.
Josh, you mentioned Mitch Marner, and I believe it's a no movement clause, right? Or is it a no trade clause? No movement, right?
Yeah, it's a full no movement clause, which obviously makes things difficult.
So I was going to say he's got to waive that, obviously. I guess what's the likelihood he waives that? And are you trading for a defenseman, right? Like there's kind of similarities. I'm not sure if you caught any of the last 90 minutes of the show, but there's a lot of talk here in Winnipeg about Nick Ehlers being traded and for a defenseman, right? So, that's you're trading from a position of strength for a position currently a weakness for the Leafs right now. Is that what you see happening if Marner is traded? I guess 2-part question. Do you think he'll waive that NMC, and do you think he'll be traded for a defenseman if he is traded?
Again, it's really impossible to know if he'd be willing to waive that no movement clause. Obviously, it's his right. He can sort of do what he wants with it. But I think there's a general feeling, the fan base has sort of turned on him a bit. And obviously, he's a guy from this area. He's from the Toronto area. So that's got to be tough in a sense for him, having a fan base turn on him like this. And maybe it's possible that him and the organization just feel like a fresh start would be better, for him to get away from all the media pressure here. So again, it's impossible to say, but I think there's a chance he'd be willing to waive. We'll have to find out. And if he is willing to waive, it'd probably be for a select few teams, obviously. As for what they would look for in a trade, I mean, you're obviously not going to get proper value for someone with a no movement clause like this, just because the market's completely, dampened, I guess. But I think ideally, if for the Leafs, they'd probably be looking for a young, controllable defenseman or a young, controllable center. I think that's sort of an underrated need because Tavares is entering the last year of his deal as well. And Tavares at this point might be best suited to move to the wing. He's 33, doesn't move as well as he used to. Not that skating was ever a big strength of his, but and even into the playoffs, they had Pontus Holmberg as the third line center, which is probably a bit of a step for him at this point in his career. And David Kampf is just a defense only, penalty killing specialist center. So I think center or defense would be ideal, but I mean, I don't know what they could possibly get in this trade just because of the situation around it. But I think just young, controllable players would be the best option.
Josh, what kind of, we know that Matthew Tkachuk is never, a fan favorite unless you're, he's on your team, but what kind of, reverberations in Toronto were his comments? I was reading that article you wrote for The Score 6 days ago. We all knew, this is the headline for the folks who haven't, we all knew the Bruins would beat the Leafs in round one. So what kind of stir did that create over in your neck of the woods?
Honestly, I think it's very well deserved. And I think at this point, Leafs fans probably know the team is such a punching bag for the rest of the NHL. The rest of the NHL always kind of dislikes Toronto, fair or not, for the, attention they get a lot of the time. But I mean, now that, they just keep losing in the first round year after year, or just disappointing playoff exit after disappointing playoff exit, I think it's well deserved. And I think the level-headed fans kind of understand that the jokes are 100% warranted.
Josh Wegman, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show on this Saturday morning, looking around the NHL, talking about the second round of the playoffs. You got the Rangers in a position to sweep the Hurricanes later on today, which would make it 8 consecutive victories for the Rangers. You have the Panthers also in the East, really playing bully ball against the Bruins after last night. If you look at the Panthers and you look at the Rangers, Josh, do you see either of those two teams, being ahead of the other, or do you just think that a 7-game series, if it comes to that, between those two teams for the right to represent the East in the Stanley Cup final is just a viewer's delight?
Yeah, if we get that, I think it's going to be a heck of a series. The way the Rangers are rolling right now is really tough to ignore, especially against a Carolina Hurricanes team that kind of went all in this year with the addition of Cenk Gensel, something the Canes don't typically do under their current management. So to see them have a 3-0 series lead, I think is very surprising. I think a lot of people had the Canes going to the Cup final. So that Eastern Conference final will be really fun if we get it. I'm still not completely ready to write off the Bruins or even the Hurricanes. Crazier things have happened, but the Rangers are certainly rolling and have impressed me the most. Their blue line, 1-6, is just so solid, and Vincent Trocheck is playing super well, and Zibanejad has really stepped up after a so-so regular season. And obviously they're getting the great goaltending from Igor Shesterkin.
Sorry, I know I want to get back to the second round of the playoffs because obviously I think we can all agree the second round has been better than the first round, maybe with the exception of the Leafs-Bruins series, Josh, and the Golden Knights Stars series. Let's be honest, the first round was a little underwhelming. And the second round, especially the Oilers-Canucks series, has been fantastic. And the overtimes between the Rangers and Hurricanes have been pretty good too. But I want to go back to that press conference, because the MLSE press conference, and obviously, the new CEO, Keith Pelley, announces that Brendan Shanahan is going to remain president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But, and I'm not advocating that, Shanahan should have been let go, but he's got one playoff round win, one in 10 years as president of the Toronto Maple Leafs. How surprised were you, and how surprised do you think people in Toronto, Leafs fans, were that Brendan Shanahan wasn't let go? I don't think anybody thought Brad Treliving was going to let go. But again, one playoff round win in 10 years. Like, do you think it was fair that Brendan Shanahan kept his job?
Yeah, that was a tricky situation. I mean, Shanahan, when he first came in, did a lot of great things. You know, he kind of changed the culture of the organization. Because, I mean, before him, the Leafs were just an absolute disaster, you know, just constantly like fighting for a final playoff spot, but could never really get it. So Shanahan did a lot of great things. You know, he wanted to build the Legends Row, and he retired a bunch of numbers. So he did a lot of nice things at the top. But I think his sort of unwillingness to shake up the core throughout these playoff failures probably fairly could have costed him his job here. I kind of think part of the reason he's staying on is because Keith Pelly is sort of brand new here. And like, he just got hired within the past year as MLSE president. And, you know, so he only knows Shanahan from his, I guess, interactions with him. And maybe he just felt he should stay. Yeah, honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I think it would have been completely warranted to sort of just clean house and see Shanahan go. Obviously, Tree Living just got hired a year ago, so he was always going to stay on. But it is surprising, but I also understand Pelly wanting to keep him on just because he only knows him from his interactions with him and since he's been here.
Josh Wegman of The Score, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show on this Saturday morning. If you haven't already done so, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We do this each and every Saturday from 9 to 11.
Now, Josh, I know as he mentioned the playoffs, but the one thing I want to talk about, because I think it's still so remarkable that it's happening and no one seems to be talking about it, is the move of Arizona to Utah. Like, talk about the most bizarre situation, and yet it seems like it was announced, it's happening, and now nobody's talking about it. From your perspective, I mean, how do you see the situation? What do you like? I mean, do you think that they're going to go into the year? It sounds like they're going to go into the year without a name. It'll be like the Utah Hockey Club or something like that with a generic jersey, even though apparently, you know, I mean, you look at what the fans are doing. They're creating this very detailed stuff. You think if they can do that, they certainly could hire someone to do that in the amount of time. From your perspective, is this just a very unusual situation, given the fact that it's not like the NHL hasn't known that Arizona has been a problem for so many years?
Yeah, I think it's pretty crazy how quickly everything came together. I mean, the one day everything broke, the first report was just that the NHL is making a contingent schedule with the Coyotes in Utah. And then later that day, it's like, oh yeah, they're definitely moving to Utah. And then, yeah, like you said, it's been a little bit quiet on that front lately. I know the owner on Twitter or X put out a list of possible team names. So I know that garnered some possibilities. I think it makes sense though, to go with sort of no like team name or no logo or anything the first year, in the sense that people are going to buy these Utah jerseys. Like, fans will just buy those inaugural jerseys. And then when you come up with a logo or whatever the next year, it's a whole brand new jersey and logo that you can sell. So in that sense, like from a business perspective, I think it makes sense. And again, it's a quick turnaround here. The focus is on getting the arena ready, because I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a basketball only arena. So the hockey viewings are not ideal. So they have a lot of work to do there. So it came together really quickly. And yeah, like you said, it's sort of, the attention has died down a little bit aside from the team names.
You know, Josh, I was looking at the teams that are still in the running for the Stanley Cup here. And what jumps out to me is that each of those teams has what I would describe as a superstar player. That they have a player who would roll off your tongue when you're describing some of the best players in the league, the most impactful players in the league. Those teams, you know, for the teams that don't have those players, do you think that we're at the point now, much like the NBA, where if you don't have a superstar, you really don't have a realistic shot at winning it all at season's end?
No, I don't think so. I mean, having the star players definitely helps, but I think just one sort of somewhat recent example off the top of my head was the St. Louis Blues, the year they won the Cup. I mean, maybe you put Pietrangelo, I wouldn't call him quite a superstar even in his prime, but like, it's a really good number one defenseman. Like, he was probably their best player. I think it shows though, if a goalie can get really hot and you've got a good, strong defense and you've got scoring depth, I think anything can happen in the playoffs. It can be a little random. Again, this year there wasn't really any upsets in round one, but I still kind of believe that if everything breaks right and you get hot goaltending and you get scoring depth, that a team without a superstar can still win the cup.
No, Josh, I want to go back to that Panthers-Bruins series because what did the Panthers have? 4 power play goals yesterday? What was it? 3 or 4 power play goals? I forget. But it looks to me like the Bruins are just outmatched. Like, the series isn't over yet. And obviously they took game 1 in South Florida. But what's kind of your take been of that series? Because, speaking of scoring depth, look, the Bruins are a great team. I'm not taking that away from them. I just think they're up against a much better opponent in the Florida Panthers, who I wouldn't be surprised if they go back to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I mean, I think maybe part of Boston winning game 1, which kind of took some people by surprise, was they were still sort of riding that momentum of like a game 7 and a hard fought series that went 7 games. Whereas, Florida had a bit of time off. Maybe they were a little too relaxed for that game 1, a little rusty, maybe. I'm not sure. But like Boston sort of still had that game 7 energy for game 1 of round 2. And then maybe that's slowly fading away a bit. And I do think Florida is a much better team. I mean, Boston too was just getting exceptional goaltending from Jeremy Swayman. And again, if he had stayed hot, maybe they could ride that all the way. But he sort of has come down to earth a little bit here, which is not entirely surprising given how well he played and how much he played in round 1. But I think ultimately too with Boston is just the scoring punch is not quite there outside of David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand. Just not a lot of other weapons. Whereas, you look at Florida, I know they missed Bennett for the first 2 games, but they have like 3 lines deep that can really do some damage. And, their blue line, like Forsling, Montour, those guys move the puck really well. So I definitely think Florida is the far better team.
Josh, got to ask you about that Oilers Canucks series because it's been, I don't know how many people out East are paying attention to it, but it is, again, it's a little bit late, but it's been a fantastic series and anticipated because I think, some folks were expecting Edmonton to kind of roll Vancouver, especially when former Manitoba Moose great played 1 game for the Moose during the bubble year. Artur Silovs was is in net. I don't know how many people were expecting that once he lost Demko and had to go down the depth chart. But from your perspective, just how good has that series been and almost unexpected that the Canucks have put up as good a fight as they have against Edmonton?
Yeah, it's just been fantastic hockey, like you said. And I'm guilty of kind of thinking the Oilers might walk all over them. They just looked so dominant in round 1 against, I think, a really good LA Kings team that maybe is a little underrated. And then, Vancouver had maybe a little bit more trouble expected getting past Nashville. But again, with the goalie situation and no Demko, I sort of thought, oh man, they might be in trouble against that Oilers offense. But that game 1 comeback was incredible. I mean, I love that goal, the winner by Garland, the fake slap shot, slip at 5-hole, kind of reminds me of like stuff Jason Spezza used to do. So, but yeah, it's been really fun hockey. I really hope it goes 7. My personal prediction this year was the Oilers to win the cup. I just kind of feel like, team with McDavid and Draisaitl is going to get it done eventually. So I'm sort of sticking to that, but that
pick's looking pretty good right now. I got to say, they have some work to do against the Canucks, but based on Draisaitl and McDavid combining for 8 points, Josh, it's looking not bad.
It's not like I went out on a limb, right? I picked the team with the best player.
Yeah. It's not like you took the Jets or anything.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? The Jets surprised a lot of people this year. I know round 1 didn't go your way, but they had a great season. So I hope Edmonton, Vancouver goes 7 because that would be a lot of fun. The crowds in Vancouver have been really good. They missed playoff hockey the last few years, so it's good to see that arena rocking again.
Josh Wegman covers the NHL for thescore.com. Josh, appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining us this morning on the program.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Take care, Josh.
Cheers, Josh. Thanks.
There he goes, Josh Wegman joining us this morning here on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Did you guys, I have to ask you guys this, talking about the Oilers and the Canucks, and it's been a hell of an entertaining series. Did you see that video that the Edmonton Opera put out?
Please,
Dave, I know you did. You're online.
Do you have it queued up, Drew?
I'm going to try and find it. If I can get it queued up really quick, I'll look for it.
No, for the record, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, really? You don't know what I'm talking about?
One of the most cringeworthy things I've ever seen.
It's
I don't. I can't.
Let's play it. No, we'll play it. Play it, Drew. Get it up.
His second screen.
Let me see if I can find it.
Well, Dave, we have to put it up for you now because you haven't seen it yet. You have no idea. There we go.
Oilers Nation is ready with Skinny and Ned, Leon's one-time reppin'. And don't forget Hyman, he's parked in front. He's parked in front and on the hunt.
You know the Oilers are ready.
I mean,
enough.
No. Keep it going.
Like, they deserve. I think they deserve to never win another game based on this.
Oh, they did it like La Bamba. Okay.
Like Richie Valens is rolling over in his grave, I think, listening to this.
Bamba.
It's killing my ears, so I'm going to take that off. But I think that's the reason.
It's not even in sync. Like, it's like out of tune.
It's just
not that I'm a crooner or anything like that, but I mean, it's terrible.
It's just terrible.
Is your boy Bruce? You can't unhear that.
Oh, like I saw it and I was like, "What is this poison?"
It's like listening to Drew do karaoke, Dave.
I definitely saw that online, but I definitely didn't click the listen button.
Well, I mean, look, they're great singers. So
like are they? Rob Mahoney's comment got us behind.
I don't think they are great
singers.
This
is what happens to the Glee kids 20 years later.
Well, they're opera singers, Ezzy. They're professional opera singers.
Are they?
I mean, I think they may have been working with some terrible material, but
I don't like opera.
Well, I mean, look,
opera's not my thing.
Opera's an incredible talent, and to be able to be a professional opera singer,
I like heavy metal. I'd rather listen to System of a Down.
There you go.
Do you know, Drew? I don't think you know.
It's just such a bad. Like, at some point,
talk about your Ludacris concert coming up, Drew.
I do have the Ludacris concert.
Luda.
Yeah, but at some point in time, somebody just needed to say no. Let's maybe take a step back and not subject the world to this horror. I mean, it was painful,
well,
and of course,
I will say, if you want to go from like terrible to look at and listen to fantastic. Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis last night, incredible.
Yes.
Put your picture up, Drew. Or Dave.
Everywhere. It's all good. Fine, if you insist. Everywhere in the world, it's been fantastic. And I think I saw KWB saying that it's going to be great again tonight. There's one of my pictures. It was, you could see reds and greens and blues. It was fantastic.
What's your favorite color of those?
I go for the whole Roy G. Biv as. But the point I'm making is that Roy G. Biv. Come on, you remember Roy G. Biv, don't you?
I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
Roy G. Biv doesn't get me either. There's Dave's photo from last night.
It looks like a sky.
Wait, have you really never heard?
Wow, it looks like every other picture I've seen of Aurora Borealis.
Well, I'm not saying it was unique.
Wow, Dave, you're snarked. I thought it was a good photo, but Ezzy is snarking you hard right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Drew, for the backup. And Roy G. Biv, I can't believe you guys don't know, is the acronym for the colors that make up the rainbow.
Ah, okay. I thought
what about CMYK?
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. You unlearned savages.
There you go. Some people in the chat knew what you were talking about.
Thank you, chat.
You could have just said the colors of the rainbow. That would have made it a little bit easier.
Could have wanted to keep it esoteric.
What about LeVar Burton and Reading Rainbow?
I went outside the kids were.
You went outside this week. Good for you, Drew.
I went outside last night to look for the Northern Lights because
old man shakes fist at cloud
phenomenon was happening, but I wasn't able to see them from too much tree cover. So the trees were blocking my view last night, unfortunately.
There's 2 events coming up this week. Should let the crowd know. 2 events. Well, we got the Kenny and Rennie end of season party. We're going to be at that.
That's Monday, right?
That's Monday, starting at 6:00. So want to hang out with last year only I went. This year it's I believe the trio.
I have Sam's baseball game first, so after
you're coming later.
You said be there. I'm hoping to be there later. I don't know what time does the shindig go until? I don't know. Does it go into the wee hours?
It's like Lionel Richie. All night
you're
long.
Playing baseball against 7-year-olds,
and I'm dominating the dojo. Let me tell you, just like Kramer.
Hold on, we got Dallas. We're hoping the IC merch. Good question by you. is going to be out this week. I've been reliably informed to ask for an update on Thursday or Friday. So
Drew needs his icy thong with this weather, Dave.
Yes, exactly. And more importantly, hold on 1 second. Uno momento. Hold on.
Moose end of season roundtable.
Put on your antlers. It's time for the Minuk Moose Minute on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
I'm a little concerned in how long it took you to press the button, to be perfectly honest.
Well, because I wasn't queued up. I was thinking about other things. I was thinking about the pretty colors of the Aurora Borealis. But join us on Thursday from 3 till 5, right after WST. We'll be doing our 23-24 Moose end of season roundtable with players, hopefully head coach. We know GM Craig Heisinger will be joining us, so it should be another fun end of season wrap up show. Daniel Fink, myself, maybe Austin Saragusa, maybe someone else, but we'll let you know as the week progresses.
True or false? The Moose season ended a month ago.
It did. No, it did not, actually.
It only ended about 2.5 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago.
And
like that.
I've just started.
Shouldn't this just be a preview for the 24-25 season?
Well, I mean, in essence, I guess it could be, but we'll be. As folks have noticed, hopefully, we've been releasing our Moose end of season interviews, and those have been up. We had Jimmy Olney and Dylan Anhorn yesterday. And so we'll have more. Brad Lambert, Nikita Chibrikov, all the Jets prospects. Those will be available on our YouTube page in the coming week.
And the roundtable for Phyllis, she said Wednesday, but I thought you said Thursday. Is that right?
No, Thursday. As of right now, it's Thursday, 3 to 5.
There you go. You can look forward to that this week during Dave's end of season Moose Roundtable. Last year's was great, so I'm sure that this year's will be just the same. Want to say a big thank you to both Jeff Hamilton and Josh Wegman for joining us this morning on the show. In case you missed either of those interviews, they will be available, of course, for download in the immediate replay on the podcast and, of course, on the YouTube channel as well. Big thank you to all of our sponsors who make this show, the post-game show when it exists, and, of course, the website a possibility. That's our friends at Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, Grid Park, Linden Market Dental Center, Zappia Group Realty, Tough Duck, Boston Pizza, and Seagram. Support these fine businesses because of their continued support of Illegal Curve Hockey. Dave, Ezzy, good job by both of you. I hope you have a great Saturday and you get great rest of whatever is in store for you both on this fine, beautiful weather weekend.
Hitting up the fair at the Grand Park Mall. So if you've got kids and you want to ride that Ferris wheel, I'll be on that Ferris wheel in about 2 hours.
There you go. Get in line because Ezzy's going to be knocking your kids over and to get to that front of the line.
And stealing their mini donuts.
There you go. He's going to be throwing elbows left, right, and center. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Smash the like button. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave us feedback. We'll see you next Saturday for another edition of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from Illegal Curve Hockey. For more great Illegal Curve content, subscribe to the Illegal Curve YouTube channel, follow at Illegal Curve on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit your online home for hockey in Winnipeg, illegalcurve.com.